practice doing that. I'm going to talk about Flow. It's a type checking tool for JavaScript. I have used this for 2 months now, and sure, I can talk about it and try to learn some more. So I'm practically a noob. It was held a talk at Palma last year by, Jesus, I forgot your name. Alexander Bjerkan. Yes. And hopefully this is not too bad in comparison. Has anyone touched Flow before? It's like 7 people? 8? Yes. Does anyone else know how type checking in other languages work? Yeah. So the why and what. JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, which means that when you execute the code, the runtime will check your types then. In a statically typed language, they will check during compile time. The difference is that when you do it dynamically, you will have a lot more trouble with issues with production code. While when you do it in a statically typed language, you will get your errors up front and you will be able to fix it before you launch your product. TypeScript is the dominant language in Angular world, and JavaScript is a dominant language in React world. And this is basically the JavaScript way of doing TypeScript. TypeScript compiles to JavaScript. So it's practically the same, but it's a little bit different. So how do I use it? You use it by annotating your code. This is something that is done in multiple languages. You add to your language by giving it some plugins, and you annotate your code, and the annotations are removed during compilation. Because this is a way of changing how JavaScript is written, it doesn't necessarily run as you write it. So you are requiring to use a transpilation or compilation step. Typically, it is Babel, or you also have a remove flow plugin as well. So for every file, you would annotate it by \\flow, and that says to the flow server that you want to check the types of this file. You can use flow fixme to say that you're going to ignore this file. At the moment, there is no block ignore, so you have to annotate each and every line you want to ignore. The typical way is just make a variable, use a colon, and the type you want to use. You have a lot of basic types. I'll show you afterwards. And you can make your own types. So you can also use what's called library definitions, which is for all things you download from NPM or something like it. There's an open source way of writing type definitions for those packages. So you can download those and they will be fixed for you. Yes, Michael?
Are the type definitions usually separate packages on NPM?
Yes. As far as I know, you can put a step to download them during your build scripts.
Could I just interject?
Yeah.
It's not a separate package at NPM, but you use a separate package from NPM to download files that are in one repo. So you don't get a package JSON that's like...
All right, thank you. There is a possibility to write valid JavaScript code without compiling it by putting every type annotation inside a comment, but it makes it very hard to read. So it's not, it's not good. And one important thing is to understand also that Flow is a project that is under development. It is, as far as I know now, in version 2. And they have gone for what's called soundness and not completeness. The difference is that they give you error messages for things that may happen. not necessarily what will happen. Here you have the primitive types: number string, boolean, void, which is undefined, and null. There are the primitives. You can have literal types, which is practically an enum, which, as you can see, ID2 is either a 0 or a 1. So if you try to type in something else, a different number, it will say it's not right. If you can use then all the primitives, or you can use your own types as well. You have maybe types, which is quite common in several languages today, which says that it can either be this type or it's null or nothing. And when you do the maybe types, you usually have to do what's called a refinement, which is in your code where you use it, you will have to check for the null type. Or if you say it's 3 different types or a enum like in queen or worker, you will have to check for either of them if you want to do something, especially with one of them. Yes?
So for the last slide, so what's going on the line number 9, ID2? So 0, 5, 1 equals 1.
Yeah, this is the or. So you say that ID2 has to be either 0 or 1, which is 2 number types, but then you can put in either 0 or 1 here. If you try to put in 2, it doesn't work. The same is here. You can be either queen or you can be a worker. So everything else but those will not work, even though there are strings.
It's the type and then the sign.
Right.
Yeah. So you have the variable name, you say that you want to put a type, and the typical assignment afterwards. And also here, the question mark assigns it to be a maybe type. So it's maybe a number, or it might be 0, or null. Correct me. And you don't use the type called undefined, you use void instead, which is quite important to understand. The typing uses a nominal and a structural type system, which means a nominal only cares about the name of the class, or if it's a proper subtype of the class. I haven't worked with classes that much, so I don't know how they actually use it. But for the most, you'll use the structural one. So you'll have classes on nominal, and you have objects and functions using the structural typing, which means, as I did here, either you have the right name, then you're nominal, or you fit into a box, then you're structural. So let's type all the things and go to Visual Code if you want to let me out of here. And if we can do like this. There. So I'm doing this in our repo for S, just because I don't know how to set it up yet. It's a lot of work, and you have to do Webpack and compile and Babel and everything like this, and it's outside my scope of knowledge. So here you see the primitive types, as I said, the literal types, the maybe types, and when you want to make a non-exact type, which means this type it requires the required property if you want to use the type, but you can put in everything else also. If you want to have so you can see you can put in the name as well as a property, and it doesn't complain. So I think it's called an open type, will allow you to put more properties even though you have put a type that doesn't mention it. You can have an exact type, which you annotate with using the pipes on both sides, as seen here, there and there, which means that everything you try to say be a exactamundo type will complain if you have something else in it. So you will get this Sometimes very cryptic message, but generally it just says that you haven't mentioned this property, please remove it or fix your type. You can make union and intersection types. So if you have the types A and B, you can make a union type C by just annotating a ampersand in between, which means if you use this type, it works like this. It accepts both fields. You can also do this with exact types, but it's slightly different, because if you do it just like that, it will give you an error. You'll have to use the spread operator in JavaScript to actually take all the properties and build a new type out of it. Yes?
What's the thing with the pipes inside the curly brackets?
That's what tells Flow that it is an exact type. So it says that this type only accepts these properties and nothing else. So you'll have the combo breaker, which uses the F type, which was just an ampersand, doesn't work. And you have the G type, which uses the spread operator, which then works. You can build an enum from an object. So if you want to have a proper enum during runtime that you can use for type checking what you get from an input, you can use object freeze. Then Flow will accept it as a possible standard for these types.
René, what does object.freeze do to the object?
What it does is it says you can't change the object at all. So you can't add properties, you can't remove properties, so it's completely immutable. And then you can use the keys to ask for all of these, diamonds, spades, clubs, and hearts. And you'll have a type which includes those. And then it says, okay, it can be all of these, they're all strings. And you can also define a object type which accepts a string as its key and only particular types for each of its property values. So you'll have, this is allowed. But if I do this, something, and I can't write, it gives me an error. Because I've said that it's only going to be either a Boolean or a number for all of its values. Yeah, I had an example actually. Yes. Any questions? Anything you want me to try? The demo gods are with me. I don't have to do things. All right, so let's go back.
Could I just... Oh, yeah, you're not finished with the talk.
I'm not completely finished, but if you have questions for this, sure.
No, I'll wait. I'll wait.
Keynotes. But some challenges. Library definitions aren't necessarily that fast to be updated. And we've seen that some of the things that we are continuously struggling with are still in development on the library itself, and the library definitions are even further behind often. And one thing that we've had a lot of is what's called an arity error, which is you can make a tuple, which is known from many other languages, but you don't have a proper tuple in the JavaScript. But it says that you have these many elements in an array, and anything else will give me an error. And a lot of the immutable YODAS methods, which is a library, gives us an error on exactly this, because it says, I don't have a definition for this, you're probably doing something wrong. And also, building objects during runtime is very difficult because you're trying to make something that Flow cannot properly comprehend. So it says, no, it's not this type, it's not this type, and you try to return something that doesn't fit here, and you usually have to either use the Flow fix me annotation to ignore it, or as far as I know, maybe it's even better if you use the not object-oriented, but functional programming versions of it. You actually build the object in full the first time. It might work better if you do that. Also, you can cast your types, but it usually breaks syntax highlighting, which is really annoying. And lately, we've found that flow might just stop. It's really slow at times because, I don't know. And you have to, we are using just a simple npx flow stop, just a small script that you download and run. And I've read a little bit about it. It's probably because of some memory leaks here and there, and it might be because of flow going in an infinite loop on some, because it doesn't properly run your code, but it tries to, well, comprehend what your code is supposed to do, but it probably goes into a loop there as well. Then it's you. Erik.
Yeah, you've talked a lot about the technical side of it, and also the downsides. But you, as the freshest guy on our team, perhaps there are no upsides, but what would you say have been the upsides to you coming into project with using Flow?
The biggest upside is definitely knowing what something takes in. We have a lot of different components in our React library, and if I know what I have to send in, it's much easier for me to actually use it. And the same, if I know what it comes out of it, it's much easier to use it. So for me, it's much easier comprehending our code base based on having some type system. The downside is I have to fight with this every day, and you have to null check everywhere, and you have to do a lot of things that you usually would just ignore, but would lead to bad code in the end and problems during the runtime. So it saves me a lot of hazardous coding, but it also gives me a lot of, because I don't know this system properly yet, it gives me more work up front.
Well explained, I would say.
Yes, Michael.
Compared to like checking with prop types, just React prop types, are there huge upsides to this, or?
The one downside I know is that you don't have this runtime. There's no way of using the type system from Flow to check your input fields. And I think you're able to do that with prop types. But I don't know the potential upsides. Maybe Eirik can answer, because I think he's been...
It's been a long time since I used prop types last. For those who don't know, prop types is the previous alternative to Flow from Facebook. So you would make an object and say, okay, this is the properties that this object expects. But isn't prop types checked at runtime? Or are there? Yeah, okay. But this is checked while you type. I'm sure there are systems that can check prop types beforehand. The other good thing is that you don't just use this for your like components. You use this for your library functions and also for your helper functions. So the reason why it's called Flow is because of an image of this huge graph with the variables and types flowing all around and having complete control, not just at the endpoint, but throughout your entire code base. Yeah.
So in general, it moves the typing from being a dynamically typed language to being a statically typed language. That would probably be the difference.
But it's really plug and play, so you don't have to type your entire project. That's very important to know.
Yeah,
you
by
can start with
annotating
one
your
file.
Yeah, by annotating your files with / or / flow, you will say that Flow will check this file. Everything it doesn't have that annotation will be ignored.
So you have this in your Entur project?
Yeah.
Berett? No.
Entur betjent.
Betjent. So if you could restart Betjent today, would you use TypeScript instead?
I don't know. I haven't used TypeScript. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't have much experience with TypeScript either, but my impression is that in Flow you can more easily skip a file if you haven't typed some intermediary file, then you still don't necessarily lose out on your on the type system. There's also a really cool operator. I'm sure there is an equivalent in TypeScript, and I think we might evaluate TypeScript if we started today. But there are many cool tricks, such as the star operator that you didn't show here, that you can just get Flow to automatically conjure up what the type is for a small price in runtime. Perhaps
So
that's the reason why we're running slow.
Forcing an inferred type, you mean?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Because Flow will infer your type. It will try to tell us based on what it looks like, if you haven't annotated it yourself.
Yeah. I think I would say as usual there's no best solution, but this is a very plug and play solution. But if you are into a more complete, or if your entire team is into typing and is already on board, then I think TypeScript might be the best solution for you. But if you're just trying to convince your team, then I think I would go for Flow, because then it's a smaller step. Yeah.
Thank you.
What else?
Wow, type systems, exciting.